Lyra's world had always been shrouded in mystery. Beneath her stunning beauty and alluring charm lay secrets she had learned to hide well. The secluded town she called home was as quiet as the secrets she kept. People knew her but didn't know her. Not really. She was the alpha of her pack, a werewolf born with extraordinary power, and every full moon she disappeared into the woods to become something far more dangerous than the gentle woman she appeared to be. Lyra was accustomed to keeping her distance from the people in the small town of Silvercrest. There were too many secrets she couldn't risk revealing, too many mysteries wrapped around her life that she needed to protect. Being a werewolf, especially an alpha, meant living with constant restraint, suppressing urges that could rip through the fragile facade of normalcy she maintained. But all of that changed when Ethan arrived. The first time she saw him, Lyra was out for one of her habitual evening walks. The sun had dipped behind the rolling hills, and twilight spread across the town like a velvet cloak. Lyra moved quietly, blending into the shadows as she always did. Then, she caught the scent, different from the others, something unfamiliar yet not entirely unpleasant. She turned, and there he was, standing near the old bookstore, watching the sunset with an expression of quiet wonder. Ethan. He was new to Silvercrest, having moved there only weeks before, yet he seemed already at ease with the slow pace of the town. Lyra was intrigued against her better judgment, and though she fought the urge to approach him, something in her heart pulled her forward. "Nice view, isn't it?" Lyra's voice broke the quiet, causing Ethan to glance her way. She cursed herself internally for initiating the conversation, but it was too late now. He smiled, a warm, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "It is. I don't think I'll ever get tired of these sunsets. I haven't seen anything quite like it where I'm from." "And where's that?" Lyra asked, feigning casual interest. She was trying to maintain the air of indifference she always wore, but something about him disarmed her. Ethan took a few steps closer, his hands shoved into the pockets of his jacket. "I'm from the city. Nothing too exciting. Thought I could use a change of pace." "Silvercrest will definitely give you that," she replied. "It's quiet here, sometimes a little too quiet." "Is that why you like walking alone?" he asked, his tone playful, but with genuine curiosity. Lyra felt a flicker of unease. Her evening walks were her escape, a way to clear her head from the weight of her double life. She wasn't used to being noticed, let alone questioned about her habits. "I guess I just like the peace," she said with a slight shrug, hoping the answer would satisfy him. But Ethan was persistent. "I think I understand. This place has its charm. It's mysterious, don't you think?" "Mysterious?" Lyra raised an eyebrow, and for a moment she wondered if he could see through her, if he somehow knew the truth about her. She forced a laugh. "What's mysterious about Silvercrest?" Ethan chuckled softly, looking at her with a glint in his eyes. "I don't know. Just a feeling, like there's more going on beneath the surface." Lyra's heart skipped a beat, but she maintained her composure. She studied him for a moment, his dark hair tousled slightly by the wind, his eyes filled with curiosity but without malice. He was different from the others in town. He seemed to seek out what was hidden, to be drawn toward things that most people ignored. She felt a pang of vulnerability that she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. For a moment, silence stretched between them. Lyra turned her gaze back toward the horizon, hoping it would calm the storm brewing inside her. Ethan didn't push further, but he didn't leave either. "I'm Ethan, by the way," he said finally, offering his hand. Lyra hesitated before taking it. "Lyra." From that moment on, their paths began to cross more often. At first, it was by chance, a bump into each other at the grocery store, a polite nod when they passed each other on the street. But then, as if pulled by an invisible force, their conversations grew longer. Ethan would stop by the bookstore, lingering outside, waiting to catch a glimpse of Lyra on her evening walks. And Lyra, despite her instincts to keep her distance, found herself looking forward to seeing him. One evening, they met by the lake at the edge of town. It was a secluded spot, far from prying eyes. Lyra had always come here to think, but now Ethan was sitting beside her, skipping stones across the still water. The moon was rising, casting a silver glow over the surface. "Why Silvercrest?" Lyra asked, genuinely curious now. "Why leave the city for a place like this?" Ethan tossed another stone before answering. "I guess I wanted a fresh start. I was tired of the noise, the rush. It felt like I wasn't living my own life, you know?" Lyra nodded, understanding more than he realized. "And do you think you'll find that here?" He looked at her then, his eyes serious for the first time. "I'm not sure yet, but there's something about this place. About the people here." Lyra's breath caught in her throat. There was a weight to his words, a depth that hinted at more than he was saying. She turned away, watching the reflection of the moon ripple on the water. "I like it here," he added, his voice softer now. "It feels right." Lyra swallowed hard, her mind racing. She couldn't afford to let him get any closer. He didn't know what he was getting into, didn't know the dangers that lurked just beneath the surface of her calm exterior. She was a werewolf, a creature of the night, bound to her pack and her responsibilities. There was no room in her life for human connections. "You don't know me, Ethan," she said quietly, her voice almost a whisper. "Not really." He tilted his head, studying her with those kind eyes that made her feel exposed. "Then tell me. I want to know you." She shook her head, her throat tightening. "I'm not like everyone else." "Good," he said, a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "I don't want you to be like everyone else." Lyra's heart thudded in her chest. She had to be careful. Letting someone in meant risking everything. But Ethan's presence was like a balm to the loneliness that had been gnawing at her for so long. He made her feel seen, understood, in a way that no one else had. But it was dangerous. She was dangerous. "You don't understand," she murmured, standing up abruptly. "I can't." Ethan stood up too, his brow furrowed in concern. "Lyra, what is it? What's wrong?" "I just can't," she repeated, her voice cracking with the weight of her secret. She turned to leave, but his hand caught hers, stopping her in her tracks. "Lyra," he said softly, his voice pleading. "Whatever it is, you don't have to go through it alone." His words broke something inside her. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. The pull of human connection, the warmth of his touch. It was overwhelming. For the first time in a long time, she felt the walls she had built around herself begin to crumble. But she wasn't just human. She was a werewolf. And Ethan had no idea what he was getting into. For weeks, they spent time together. They explored the town's hidden paths, shared stories of their pasts, well, Ethan did, and found comfort in each other's presence. But every full moon, Lyra would vanish. Ethan, puzzled by her sudden disappearances, began to wonder what she was hiding. When she would return days later, she offered no explanations, and her strange behavior started to plant seeds of doubt in Ethan's mind. "Why do you keep disappearing?" Ethan asked one day, his voice tinged with frustration. He had grown tired of the mystery. Lyra's eyes softened. "I'm not ignoring you, Ethan. There are things in my life that I can't explain. I wish I could, but you wouldn't understand." "Then help me understand," he shot back. "You can't just walk in and out of my life like this." She turned away, knowing that with the full moon approaching next week, she had little time left to prepare. The wildness inside her would take over soon, and she couldn't risk hurting him. She said nothing more, leaving him standing in the cold, his anger building as she disappeared once again. In his frustration, Ethan followed her one evening. He wasn't sure what he was expecting to find, but he needed answers. What he saw shattered the remnants of his trust. There, under the moonlight, Lyra transformed. She was not human, but a magnificent, fearsome creature, a werewolf. Ethan's heart raced and he watched in horror as the truth unfurled before his eyes. She was dangerous. He had been falling for someone who could end his life in seconds. Without confronting her, Ethan distanced himself. Days passed, and he avoided her entirely. He couldn't face her, not after seeing what she truly was. But what he didn't know was that Lyra was equally torn. She had developed feelings for Ethan too. Despite her nature, she had grown attached to him, but she knew he would never look at her the same way if he knew what she was. Enter Sarah, a beautiful new girl who seemed overly interested in Ethan. Lyra noticed Sarah's behavior and felt a stab of jealousy, though she tried to push it aside. Ethan, though uninterested in Sarah, decided to entertain her advances as a way of proving a point to Lyra. But when Lyra observed Sarah more closely, she noticed something wasn't right. Sarah was not human either. Lyra followed Sarah one evening and discovered her true nature. Sarah was a vampire, dangerous and far more sinister than Lyra could ever be. Lyra confronted Ethan. "You need to stay away from Sarah," Lyra urged, her tone laced with urgency. Ethan, cold and dismissive, retorted, "Why? Is she dangerous? Or are you?" The words stung more than Lyra could have anticipated. Ethan knew her secret, and it was that knowledge that had driven him away from her. She tried to explain herself, to convince him that she wasn't dangerous, at least not to him, but Ethan walked away. A few days later, Ethan didn't show up at college. Lyra's worry grew, and she began to search for him, hoping that he had simply skipped class, but her gut told her otherwise. She remembered the forest where she had seen Sarah in her vampire form. Could it be? She rushed to the woods, her instincts pulling her deeper into the dark, twisting paths. Then she heard it, a faint noise like laughter coming from a distance. She followed the sound, and what she saw made her blood run cold. Ethan was tied with chains, helpless, and a group of vampires stood over him. Sarah was their leader, her eyes gleaming with malicious intent. Lyra's heart burned with fury. She called upon her pack, and together they planned to ambush the vampires. But as she crept closer, a small sound betrayed her, a squirrel darting by her feet. One of the vampires turned in her direction. "We're not alone," he hissed. Before they could investigate, Lyra's pack stormed into the clearing, a whirlwind of claws and teeth. The fight was chaotic, with both sides evenly matched. Ethan, still tied and helpless, watched in horror as Lyra transformed into the powerful werewolf he had seen before, tearing through the vampires with a fury that left no doubt where her loyalty lay. She wasn't one of them. She was fighting for him. But it wasn't over. As the battle came to an end, Ethan realized Sarah and Lyra were locked in a deadlier game than he had imagined. Sarah was strong, perhaps too strong, and when Ethan looked around, he saw that Sarah had disappeared, taking Ethan with her. Lyra's heart sank as she heard a scream, echoing through the forest. She followed the sound, her wolf senses guiding her to a secluded part of the woods. There she found Sarah preparing a dark ritual. Ethan was tied to a wooden table, his life hanging by a thread. The vampire planned to drain his life force and use it to extend her own. Lyra didn't attack. She stepped forward, her heart breaking as she saw the man she loved in such danger. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Do you love her?" He looked up, pain etched across his face. "No," he replied weakly. "I loved you, Lyra. I always will." Sarah sneered. "Why don't you fight, Lyra? You know you can't defeat me." Lyra, her voice steady despite the chaos around her, responded, "I know. I can't defeat you." Sarah laughed, but the sound was cut short when Ethan, his voice weak but clear, spoke up. "I have a last wish," he said, looking at Lyra. "If she'll allow it, I want to kiss Lyra one last time." Lyra, tears in her eyes, nodded. She leaned over, pressing her lips to his, pouring all the love and sorrow she felt into that single moment. And as she did, something incredible happened. Ethan began to transform. His body shifted, growing larger and more powerful, until he stood before them as a werewolf, strong, fierce, and free. Lyra stepped back, watching as Sarah's face twisted in shock. You were always a werewolf," Lyra murmured, realization dawning on her. Ethan had been one of them all along, though neither of them had known it. In the dim light of the forest, shadows danced around the ancient trees, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. Ethan felt the rush of his newfound strength surge through him, a wild energy coursing in tandem with his heart. The full moon illuminated the clearing where he stood, facing Sarah, a powerful vampire with crimson eyes that glowed with a predatory hunger. With a sudden burst of speed, Sarah lunged, her fangs bared and ready to strike. Ethan instinctively raised his arm to block her, feeling the sharp impact of her strike. He stumbled back, but quickly regained his footing, the instinct to fight sparking within him. This wasn't just a struggle for survival, it was a battle for his very soul. Sarah advanced again, her movements graceful yet menacing. She swiped at him with a ferocity that would have sent a lesser opponent sprawling. Ethan could feel her power, ancient and terrifying, but the wolf inside him roared in defiance. Channeling his inner strength, he pushed back, landing a solid punch that sent her staggering. But the vampire was relentless. With each strike, Ethan realized he was outmatched. Just as she began to gain the upper hand, the atmosphere shifted. A low growl echoed through the trees, deep and primal. Lyra, the alpha of her pack, burst into the clearing. Her presence radiated strength and the air crackled with her energy. "Ethan!" she shouted, her voice a fierce battle cry. Lyra leaped into action, her movements fluid and powerful. She charged at Sarah, her claws extended and eyes blazing with determination. In a matter of moments, she closed the distance between them, overwhelming the vampire with a flurry of strikes. Sarah, realizing she was outmatched, hissed in frustration. But Lyra was relentless. "You've underestimated us," she snarled, her voice low and fierce. Together, Ethan and Lyra formed an unbreakable bond, their energies intertwining as they pushed Sarah back, forcing her to retreat. Sarah, now defeated, gasped for breath. "If you were so powerful," she asked Lyra, "why didn't you fight earlier?" Lyra's eyes gleamed with understanding. "I knew Ethan was one of us. I'd been watching him, and I knew his true form would only emerge through true love. His father had been cursed, and only love could break that curse." The vampire, sensing defeat, disappeared into the shadows, leaving behind a haunting silence. Ethan looked at Lyra, his heart swelling with gratitude and admiration. "We did it," he said breathlessly, feeling the exhilaration of their victory. Lyra smiled, her eyes softening as she stepped closer. "Together we're unstoppable," she whispered, sealing their bond in the moonlit forest, ready to face whatever darkness awaited them next. Ethan, still catching his breath, looked at Lyra with a new understanding. "I'm sorry, Lyra," he said, his voice filled with regret. "I should have trusted you." Lyra smiled, leaning in for another kiss. "It's okay," she whispered. "We found each other in the end." And with that they knew their love had not only saved them both, but had also unlocked a power neither had known they possessed.